There's one symptom of spiritual awakening so intense that most people who experience it think something has gone terribly wrong. It's not bliss, not peace, not expanded consciousness. It's something that makes you question whether awakening was worth it, whether you should have stayed asleep, whether you've broken something inside yourself that can never be fixed. Carl Jung discovered that this symptom appears only in people undergoing the deepest, most complete forms of awakening. Most spiritual seekers never experience it because they never go deep enough. But those who do, those who push through to genuine transformation, all report the same devastating symptom. And Jung said, if you're experiencing this, as unbearable as it is, you're among the rare few actually completing the journey. Today I'm revealing the one symptom Jung said only the most deeply awakened individuals experience. And if you're feeling it right now, everything you think is wrong might actually be proof that everything is going right. Here's what Jung discovered. The symptom is the complete loss of your old self without a new self emerging to replace it. Not just identity confusion, total identity dissolution. You're no one. You can't remember who you were. You can't imagine who you'll become. You exist in an identity void that creates terror, unlike anything you've experienced. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, not the poetic version, the actual psychological experience. Your ego structure has died, but the self hasn't solidified yet. You're in between selves. And this between state, Jung observed, only happens to people whose awakening has gone deep enough to actually kill the old identity. Most people's awakenings are surface shifts that leave identity intact. This symptom proves yours isn't. Most spiritual teachers don't talk about this because it sounds like breakdown, not breakthrough. But Jung insisted, this identity void is the clearest sign that genuine transformation is occurring. You haven't failed. You've succeeded so completely that your old self can no longer exist. The first aspect of this symptom explains why it's so terrifying. Jung's first observation. People experiencing this symptom literally cannot answer the question, who am I? Not with uncertainty, with complete blankness. The question lands in emptiness. There's no one there to answer. Before this depth of awakening, you had answers. Maybe they changed, maybe they evolved, but you had an identity. I'm a teacher, a parent, a seeker, a survivor, something. But Jung discovered that at a certain point in genuine awakening, all these identities dissolve simultaneously. Not one at a time, all at once. And what remains is nothing. One of Jung's patients described this void. Someone asked me who I was, and I genuinely couldn't answer. Not from being philosophical, from literal inability to identify anything as me. I wasn't a body. I wasn't a personality. I wasn't roles or achievements or history. There was awareness, but no one having the awareness. The terror was absolute. I kept thinking, if I'm no one, how am I still here? How am I thinking this? Jung explained, I'd experienced ego death without self-emergence. I was in the void between identities. This is what Jung meant by identity annihilation. Not losing aspects of identity, losing identity itself. You're operating without a stable sense of self. Every action you take, you can't identify who's taking it. Every thought you have, you can't name the thinker. You're a process without a subject. You'll know you're experiencing this if people ask about you and you draw complete blanks. If you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person. If you try to describe yourself and find nothing there. This isn't dissociation. It's the death of the false self so complete that no self remains yet. But identity loss is just the first layer. The second aspect reveals why this symptom is so isolating. Jung's second observation, this symptom creates absolute inability to connect with others. not difficulty connecting, impossibility. Because connection requires a self to connect from and through. And you have no self. You're interacting with people from emptiness and they sense something's wrong. Think about what connection requires. You share your thoughts, but whose thoughts? You express your feelings, but whose feelings? You relate your experiences, but whose experiences? When identity dissolves, the you that connects with others disappears. You're still physically present, but there's no one home. One of Jung's analysans described this devastating isolation. My wife would talk to me and I'd respond, but I felt like I was performing being a person. There was no one inside performing, just automatic responses happening through a body that used to be me. She kept saying, "You're different, something's wrong." She was right, I wasn't there anymore. The person she married had died. Jung said this was why awakening at this level is so lonely. You can't connect because there's no self to connect from. This is what Jung called the unbridgeable gap. You're experiencing reality from no self while everyone else is experiencing it from self. The disconnect is absolute. They're trying to relate to a person who doesn't exist anymore. You're trying to connect from an emptiness they can't perceive. You'll recognize this if conversations feel impossible, not because you don't want them, but because there's no one to have them. If you're going through social motions while feeling completely absent, if relationships feel like you're watching them happen rather than participating, this isn't depression. It's the absence of the psychological structure that makes relating possible. But relational impossibility is just one manifestation. The third aspect creates existential panic. Here's what Jung discovered. People in this symptom lose all motivation, not depression's loss of motivation. Complete dissolution of the psychological mechanism that creates wanting. You can't find reasons to do anything because there's no one who wants anything. Before this depth, motivation came from identity. I want this because I'm this type of person. I pursue that because it aligns with my values. But when identity dissolves, motivation disappears with it. You look at your life, your goals, your projects, your plans, and feel nothing. Not failure, not apathy, nothing. One of Jung's patients described this. I couldn't get out of bed. Not from depression, from genuine confusion about why I would. Every action required a reason, and I couldn't find one. Why shower? Why eat? Why go to work? I had no answers. The person who wanted those things was gone. Jung said this was the most dangerous phase. People in identity void sometimes stop functioning entirely because the self that generates motivation has dissolved. This is what Jung meant by the loss of will. Will requires a willer. Desire requires a desirer. Motivation requires a motivated self. When that self dies, everything driven by it dies too. You're not choosing to not do things. You can't find the psychological structure that would generate choice. You'll notice you've stopped pursuing things that mattered intensely before, not because you failed or gave up, but because you can't remember why they mattered. If people ask what you want and you genuinely don't know, not uncertainty, but absence of wanting itself, this isn't giving up. It's the dissolution of the self that wants. But motivational collapse isn't the worst part. The fourth aspect is what makes people think they're dying. If you're experiencing this symptom, identity void, relational impossibility, motivational collapse, Jung would tell you, you're not broken. You're in the most critical phase of awakening. The old self is dead. The new self hasn't emerged, and this void is necessary. Before we continue, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get true self-discovery. Now, this final aspect reveals why this symptom only happens to deeply awakened people. Jung's fourth observation: people in this symptom experience raw reality without the ego filter that makes life tolerable. Every sensation, every perception, every moment hits with overwhelming directness. And without a self to buffer the impact, reality becomes unbearably intense. The ego's job is filtering reality into manageable pieces. It creates meaning, provides context, generates narratives that make sense of chaos. But when ego dissolves, so does the filter. You experience reality directly, and direct reality is terrifying. One of Jung's most profound patients described this: "I was walking outside and the sheer fact of existence hit me like a physical force. I'm here. Objects are here. Reality is happening. Without my ego filtering it into just a normal walk, the strangeness of existence itself was overwhelming. Why is there something instead of nothing? How is any of this possible?" Questions I'd intellectually considered became lived experience. The terror and wonder were so intense I collapsed on the sidewalk. This is what Jung called the numinous without container. Numinous experiences are encounters with reality's fundamental mystery. The ego normally contains these experiences, makes them manageable. But in identity void, there's no container. You're exposed to the full intensity of existence itself. You'll recognize this if normal things suddenly seem impossibly strange, if you're overwhelmed by the sheer fact of existence, if reality feels too much, too intense, too immediate. This isn't psychosis. It's perception without the psychological buffers that make ordinary life possible. But there's one final aspect that completes the picture. People experiencing this symptom know intellectually that it's necessary transformation, but this knowledge doesn't help. You understand you're in the cocoon between caterpillar and butterfly, but understanding doesn't make the dissolution less terrifying or reduce the desperate wish to make it stop. This is the cruelest aspect. You have enough consciousness to recognize this is the process. You know you're not broken, just transforming. You understand this void is making space for something new, but you can't speed it up, can't skip to the end, can't make the new self emerge before it's ready. You're trapped in the most uncomfortable phase with no control over when it ends. One of Jung's patients described this torture. Jung kept telling me, "This is normal, this is the process, you're right on track," and I believed him. But believing it didn't make it bearable. I wanted to die and be reborn already. The being dead but still alive part, the identity void, was agony, and I couldn't make it end. I just had to endure until something emerged on its own timeline. Jung said this inability to force emergence was what separated those who completed awakening from those who gave up. Most people can't tolerate the void long enough. This is what Jung meant by the ordeal of transformation. You're conscious enough to know what's happening, but powerless to control it. You can't go back. The old self is dead. You can't go forward. The new self emerges in its own time. You're stuck in between, fully aware, completely helpless. You'll recognize this if you understand your experience is transformation, but this understanding provides zero comfort. If you're desperately waiting for something to emerge, but nothing's emerging yet. If you feel trapped in the worst phase with no exit. This isn't impatience. It's the torture of conscious transformation. The symptom only deeply awakened people experience: complete identity dissolution. You can't answer who you are. Relational impossibility. You can't connect from no self. Motivational collapse. Wanting disappears with the self that wanted. Reality without filter. Existence itself becomes overwhelming. Necessary but unbearable. Knowing it's right doesn't help. Jung would want you to understand. If you're experiencing this, you're not having a breakdown. You're having a breakthrough so complete, it requires total dismantling before rebuilding. Most people's awakenings don't go this deep. They have insights, expansions, shifts, but identity remains intact. You've gone deeper. The old you has actually died. This symptom appears only in people whose consciousness has evolved enough to kill the false self completely. Most seekers talk about ego death theoretically. You're living it. Most people experience temporary shifts in identity. You've experienced identity annihilation. This is why Jung said only the most powerfully awakened feel this, because only the deepest transformation creates this level of dissolution. The void won't last forever. Jung observed it typically lasts weeks to months. Something will emerge, a self more authentic, more integrated, more whole than the ego that died, but it emerges in its own time. Your job is surviving the void. If you're in identity void right now, if you're no one, can't connect, can't want, overwhelmed by raw reality, and desperate for this to end, Jung would tell you, hold on. You're in the worst part. The part that proves you're actually transforming, not just understanding transformation concepts. Don't try to construct a new identity. Don't try to force emergence. Don't fill the void with spiritual concepts or personality rebuilding. The void is doing necessary work. It's clearing space so completely that what emerges will be authentic, not another construction. The terror is real. The isolation is absolute. The helplessness is maddening. Jung knew this. He experienced it himself. And he insisted. Everyone who completes deep awakening goes through this. The void isn't a sign you're lost. It's proof you're exactly where you need to be. What emerges from this void won't be who you were. It will be who you actually are beneath all the constructed selves you've worn. That authentic self is forming in the darkness. You can't see it yet. Can't feel it yet. But it's happening. Trust the void. As unbearable as it is, it's not your enemy. It's your transformation. Subscribe to explore Jung's insights on surviving and integrating identity void. To dive even deeper into Jung's revolutionary psychology and what it means for your spiritual awakening, click the recommended video on your screen now.